Hello, everyone. My name is Cliff Dubenwad. I'm the Director of Field Marketing for FireScope, and our webinar today, excuse me, is Configuration Management for 2019. Our presenters, we're going to have Devin Bradshaw. He's our Director of Field Engineering for FireScope in our central region. We also have Paul Yates. He's our Senior Technical Consultant for FireScope in our European division. So let's take a look at what's happening in the industry with regards to change management. Gartner came out with a report, Shift to Succeed, where they actually took a poll of CEOs out there, and a CEO-led focus is on enabling growth via digital business initiatives and cloud-first strategies. And how do they expect CEOs, or how do they expect our organizations to deliver on those initiatives? Well, first off, they're going to be taking a look at using artificial intelligence and automation. Those two items are going to be critical to helping people be able to do more with less. Secondly, we're looking at an increase of complexity and scale with cloud adoption via the cloud-first strategies, whether that's a total cloud solution or a hybrid cloud solution. And lastly, there's going to be an enterprise service management at an enterprise level that we're going to see an acceleration on. So what does that mean for configuration management? Well, configuration management is going to have to be supported by solutions that are dynamic and automatic. As far as the complexity of scale for cloud automation, basically we're moving into an environment where you have everything and anything as a service, which means that the old assets that you currently have siloed in your environment are probably going to be shut down and replaced with some kind of a cloud or a hybrid solution down the road. So you will need to make sure that you understand and have a solid configuration management strategy in place, as well as successful CMDB, so that way you know and understand which services are going to be impacted by this. Finally, as far as our enterprise service management goes, so siloed approaches to individual business units, districts, geographical locations, we're going to see that start to phase out as we do more of an enterprise solution adoption. So that right there will drive the agenda for today's webinar, Configuration Management for 2019 and into 2020. We're going to be talking about the challenges of implementing a configuration management solution in an environment, what configuration management should look like, what are the hallmarks of successful configuration management, and finally, how our FireScope secure discovery and dependency mapping solution helps with configuration management. And with that being said, I am going to turn the presentation over to Paul.
Thank you, Cliff. So as Cliff says, we're looking at why we can't achieve proper configuration management. So configuration management relies upon understanding our environment and getting it into an organized system like a CMDB. Your critical lines of business are delivered by multiple layers of hardware, servers, storage, virtualization, networking equipment. All of this information is hard to maintain the knowledge of. It's also shared between multiple services. So you don't only need to know that this server supports service A, but does it also support service B and service C, and how they interrelate. Over time, knowledge of this structure can get lost. People change, they come and go. The infrastructure itself changes. The service evolves. It's never static, so you need to keep on top of the changes, and hence the need for proper configuration management. Eventually, you're going to need to make a massive change to a service. You may need to relocate to the data, to a data center. As Cliff just said, the move now is to cloud-based or hybrid-based solutions, so you might need to take your service and put it out in the cloud. You might need to just simply upgrade the hardware, but you need to take that hardware down. You need to know what that's going to impact. Your business might be changing direction. You might want to spread that service across more business units. You need to know how you can support them. Lack of this knowledge can lead to major disruption if all the elements aren't known and you haven't prepared for the change correctly. A full, accurate and automatic map of your service produced in real time helps reduce this risk. That's what SDDM helps you achieve. Here's an example of how SDDM has already helped one of our existing customers. Genuine situation, the customer needed to move their data center. They'd done a risk assessment of their data center and discovered it was at risk of flooding from a a nearby river, and also at risk from airplane crash from a nearby airport. So they decided they needed to uproot it completely. They didn't understand their services. So we started mapping their services, and in one particular service, we found 3 servers they knew nothing about. They went away and did some investigation, and they did identify 2 of them, but they still left 1 unknown. And after much discussion, they were on the verge of saying, well, let's just move without taking that server with us. Fortunately, a few days later, before they'd done the migration, they discovered what this last server was. And it turned out to be a jump box for one of their major applications that's used by the support team. If anything had gone wrong with that service, having migrated without this particular server, the support team could not have made dialed in and could not have supported it. So they could have faced critical and massive downtime. Just shows the importance of understanding exactly how your services interrelate and what supports what. So how do we try and achieve some configuration management? First of all, you need to understand what is on your network. You need to identify all of your network attached equipment. You probably already think you've got a good idea of your servers, your storage, switches, routers, and virtual infrastructure. But that's not the end of the story. What about Internet of Things devices? This is now becoming far more prevalent in all our businesses. Hospitals, for example, have got lots of network attached equipment, heart monitors, blood pressure monitors. We need to be able to identify all of that equipment. What about your IP phones and your printers? Maybe they're not critical for your configuration management. Maybe that's going to come later, but you still need to know what they are and where they are and what service they're providing. Until you know everything, how can you decide what needs to be included in configuration control? Once you've understood what assets you've got, you need to understand their importance and how they support your services. Is this particular asset a critical part of a business service? Is it actually a critical part of more than one service? You might understand that it supports your invoicing system, but does it also support your payroll? Does it also support your procurement? You need to understand everything that is part of that service. Not only do you need to understand what that particular asset does, but you need to know what it's dependent on as well. It's all well and good knowing that the asset you're looking at is stable and solid, but the things around it that it relies on, are they also stable and solid? Do you have any assets that aren't used at all? If so, why have you got them? Why are they taking up power? Why are they using possibly support contracts and things? Once you've built a picture of all of your assets and you know what they do and how they interrelate, you can decide which services and their assets you need to be under configuration control. And once you've made that decision, you can synchronize that service and all of its assets and all of its interrelationships to a CMDB as a baseline. Once you've got that baseline, continue to monitor the service for any changes. If anything changes against that baseline, you need to respond to the change. Is the change an acceptable change? Is it something you'd actually meant to do, or is a logical change to the service? In which case, complete the change control process and update the CMDB and it becomes a new baseline. We're good to carry on. But what if it's not a device you're expecting, a change you're expecting? Why has this changed? Has somebody come along and plugged in a device to your network that shouldn't be there? Is it doing something malicious? Is it possibly siphoning off data? You need to know this and you need to go and investigate. So this is why you need a real-time comparison to the baseline. So when you're implementing a change management process, you really need a CMDB. Well, actually, you really need an accurate CMDB. It's no good having a CMDB that's full of data that isn't current. Once you've got your accurate CMDB, you need a change control process. That's the process that says when we make a change, we're going to check the CMDB and the relationships and see what it's going to impact. We're going to have a backout plan. We're going to prove that the change works using these methods and how we're going to implement the change and when. Then you can go forward and make your change, update your CMDB, and you're back to an accurate CMDB again. So your configuration management process is a cyclical process that makes sure that you know exactly where you are at all points. So I have a question for you. Where would you estimate you are in your configuration management implementation? We'll give you a minute or so to pick the answers to this. This should pop up on your screen now as a question with 4 options. Are you below 50% of your configuration is understood, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, or you haven't started yet? And this will give us an idea of how you're doing and also get you thinking about how you're doing. Do you really understand your services and your assets? I'll just give you a few more seconds to finish that. Okay, so I think the question's now gone. So with that, I will pass to Devon, who's going to talk to you about what success looks like.
Thank you, Paul. So one of the things that we want to talk about today are configuration management success and how do you drive that success. And one of the ways obviously is by managing your change. Now, one of the things you want to know is, how do you know what has changed in your environment? As you have large environments, means more individuals that are associated with that change process, and it could mean more people making decisions that aren't based off of risk and are just making bold decisions that maybe they shouldn't. And also, if the change is not properly vetted during the change approval process, how are you really sure that the change is something that you should actually have approved? And also, if the change request is not fully documented, maybe there's an individual that didn't properly outline all the critical steps in that change, and therefore the change was actually approved and the change goes through, and then there's steps that are omitted, which may cause an issue, and maybe you have to back out the change or put that in as an unsuccessful change. Also, one of the ways to kind of manage your changes is finding a way of automating discovery and dependency mapping in your environment. Obviously, the individuals in your environment aren't psychic and can predict what will change in their environment. So you have to have some type of mechanism or solution that's going to be able to have that ability for you in your organization. And again, the need for that automated tool that can periodically scan your network to identify any changes as they occur, either a new device standing up in your environment or decommissioning a server based off of that. And lastly, full knowledge of any upstream and downstream services that are impacted by the change. If you know that prior to approving a change or scheduling a change, then you'll know the actual risk of that change and use that in your change approval process. So one of the big importances of having that valuable configuration management information and success in there is obviously you have more efficient change management. It's obviously made easier by knowing the upstream and downstream dependencies and their relationships as well. It's also easier to validate if a change was truly successful. If you can see what your baseline was prior to the change and then see how that change has changed your environment or that particular application, then that'll make it a lot easier, a lot smoother process for you to validate that change was a successful change or remediate that change or back out that change. And obviously, as you get further awareness of your infrastructure and the single points of failure, it will help you with your risk analysis during your change process as you're going through. If you notice that we know that this host has a dependency based upon two different hosts, then maybe that's an issue that we want to resolve before we approve this change, rather than waiting for the change to happen and then dealing with the outcome after that. And obviously, how do you gain that valuable configuration management insight? And that is through SDDM. With the ability to view device-to-device communications in your network, we have the ability to show those interdependencies both upstream and downstream. We do that through passive network monitoring that will identify your application and transaction flows, and then also utilize that passive traffic to also auto-detect service endpoints. And obviously, since we're listening to that passive traffic, we can also see changes as they occur, either new devices being stood up on your network or new devices that should have been there, but since a change has come, that communication is no longer valid or active. With SDDM, we also have the ability to easily filter traffic to look at specific subnets in your environment. And then we can use that information to generate additional service maps to show your application dependencies. And we also have the ability with our solution to utilize other discovery methods to stitch together their dependencies. Some of those are virtual and network, which Paul will explain a little bit later in our webinar. So I'm going to bring up one use case example that I had in one of my deployments. We had a major international hotel chain that was tasked with moving their on-site email servers to a cloud-based email delivery system. Now, they were tasked to move that because of the significant cost savings to that organization. So during that process, IT determined that OWA was going to be their cloud-based delivery platform. So they went through the process of migrating all their employees to OWA. And then once that was completed, the IT team was convinced that the old email servers, about 12 of them, were not fully being utilized anymore or not being utilized at all, and were scheduled to be decommissioned. So part of this process or the task that was brought upon IT was also bring us in to deploy us in their environment to assist with their configuration management efforts. Once we were able to stand up our solution and once flow traffic was being sent to our collectors, IT management decided to run or filter a scan on all the old email servers just to be sure that there was no communications going amongst them or any other nodes in their environment communicating to those old email servers. What we were able to determine by filtering that traffic is that we were able to show that there were actually critical applications that were still dependent upon those very soon to be decommissioned email servers. A couple of those was their business intelligence module, as well as their customer contract system. So you can imagine the IT department has a change ready to decommission 12 email servers that they were 100% sure were no longer being utilized. And come to find out, with FireScope SDDM, we were able to show them that actually those servers were actually involved with just, those are two major ones, but two of the 12 business services that those email servers were still communicating with and were still considered dependencies upon those. So obviously IT promptly canceled that decommission request. And as the last little part here before I hand it back off to Paul, I just wanted to utilize a quote from the IT manager, which is a quote. If you had decommissioned those email servers, they would have had severe outages. We would have never thought it was those email servers because we were sure that nothing was using them. But FireScope SDDM showed us that we had over a dozen critical business applications that were still utilized by those servers. And one more question from me. So we're going to start that process. So have you already selected a CMDB solution to help with your configuration management? And please select one of the three. Yes, no, or we're still in the process of evaluating. We'll give you approximately a minute or so, and then we'll move on to the next section. All right, now I'm going to hand this over to Paul so he can let us know how FireScope will be able to help that process.
Thank you, Devon. So how do we achieve helping you with your configuration management? So basically, we're going to build you a map of your services. And we build this using 4 layers of data. We look at the network traffic. We consume all the network traffic headers, and we identify that server A is talking to server B over this port, this frequently, with this much data. And from that, we can build up a flow of traffic that says this part, we start a service at this party, and it goes onto this server, this server, this server, this server, and it goes round and builds the whole picture. But then we supplement that with some additional information. We do a virtual discovery. And what that means is we'll interrogate your hypervisor, and we'll try and work out the relationship between the hosts and the guests, because the guests are reliant on the hosts working, and you need to know that piece of information to correctly build all of the dependencies. Then we look at the storage. Most of the virtual infrastructure requires storage. So we need to build up a picture to say which piece of storage is used by which host and which guest, so that we can make sure that we've got that covered for any sort of configuration management. And then finally, we'll also look at the network topology. We'll literally look at the switches and the routers and work out how they relate to the dependencies within the servers as well. So it's all well and good knowing that all the servers are connected, but how are they connected, what connects them, and what happens if that piece of equipment goes down? So we'll build these 4 layers, and from that we will generate a map that will look a little bit like this. So this is a map just showing the application level only. So this is the information that we've pulled from looking at just the network traffic. And from it we can see that server A is talking to server B and the ports it's talking on. And this is a typical small service, it's just the communication between servers. We have some interesting point here. This square box here is it's a cluster. So we've interrogated your cluster servers as well to find out the virtual IPs and the IPs that services, so we can squash those together and make them look a bit more tidy than having 3 or 4 servers dotted around on there. So then we add in the virtual layer, and for the same service we can see these purple lines. You've got a host here that's supporting this client. Now this is critical because in this case, for example, we've got this host services these 2 clients. So if that host goes down, you've lost 2 parts of your service, and the service is in a very bad state. Additionally, here we've got the storage. The yellow lines show the communication between the storage and the ESX hosts in this case. So if that piece of storage goes down, all 3 of these hosts are going to be impacted. So you've got a severe reliance on that piece of storage. Maybe we should look at putting some redundancy in there. Then you add in the networking layer and the picture gets a bit busy, but that's because everything uses networking information. So all the green lines shows the interconnectivity between the network devices. So again, you need to know that if this network device here was to go down, for example, how is it going to impact the service? This machine, this server is no longer going to be able to communicate to this server, for example. Once you've achieved this, you've got every piece of information you need about your service. And once you've agreed that that is the correct picture, that is your baseline. That's what you synchronize to your CMDB. And when you synchronize it, you don't just take the CIs, but you also take the connectivity between them as well. So we'll put into the CMDB, this server is reliant on this server is reliant on this network device is reliant on this storage unit. And that whole picture goes across to the CMDB. CMDBs that we can synchronize to, we've got full support for Sherwell, ServiceNow, Matrix 42 and Ivanti. And what do we send across? We've got full control over which CIs and services to sync, so you might not want to put them all across, you may not want to put all the CIs across, but you decide that yourself. Then we need to map the CI types, so a server on one side needs to map across to what CI type on the other. And then we need to map within those CI types the fields. You do that as a once-off exercise, you define those for all of the CI types, and then from then on, the synchronization just takes care of itself. Finally, the critical decision is whose data is master. If there's data already in the CMDB, then we've detected something that's different. Do you want us to change it, or do you want us to leave it alone? You've got to decide who is the source of truth. If you've got a CMDB that isn't one of the 4 that we already support, then we've got a powerful REST API that allows us to build integration for all the other CMDBs, any other CMDB you've got. So finally, the benefits of automatic discovery is that we do discovery in real time, which means we can see if something changes. And if something changes, it lets you take informed actions. If it's a known device and the change control process wasn't completed, then you know you need to go and complete it. Go and update the change control, update the CMDB, create a new baseline, and you're back to a known state. But if it's an unknown device, does it represent a threat? Let's go and investigate. So finally, here's a use case of a customer that didn't have a CMDB at all and how we helped them with it. This is a multi-billion-dollar customer, and they were facing several challenges. They had no unified configuration management across the whole organization. They had businesses, over 80 businesses in multiple companies using multiple languages. They were looking for an automated solution. The site I was on was looking to be the leader in this, build the solution, and then spread it out across the organization. They'd already selected that they were going to use Cherwell as their CMDB, but they had nothing in their CMDB at all. So what we did was we used SDDM to discover all the network CIs and their relationships, and the customer decided to take this information as the source of truth as it's detected in real time. And the service maps that were then built for each of the critical business services, and they were synced across to the CMDB. And the information we sent across was the stuff that we'd automatically detected was things like the device type, the device name, its IP address, serial numbers, operating system, and many other bits of information. But these are known to be true because we've gone and found them in real time. We know this thing's there. We also know its status. We know it's live because we found it. So we send that information across to the CMDB. The customer then chose to supplement this data with data from other sources. So they used some information from Active Directory, they used information from SACM, and they used some manual information. There was some paperwork to do with warranties which had to be entered manually. All of this allowed them to build a full, accurate CMDB from which they could then base their configuration management. That was the starting point, which hopefully we're going to expand upon and roll this out to other sites. So with that, I'm going to hand you back to Cliff to finish off and summarize.
All right, thank you, Paul. So in summary, we've shown you today how to have a successful configuration management strategy and how it's critical to have this for your applications as you migrate them towards the cloud. And with the push to the cloud, we've presented 2 examples today of FireScope customers that used our solution, not only with their configuration management strategy implementation, but also 2, to help them avoid severe outages on several critical business services that they provided. Of course, having an automated near-time solution to alert IT users to changes in their environment is really what makes FireScope SDDM very proactive and a vital member to your solution suite. And this automation, along with our other built-in features like native access to Shearwell and ServiceNow, et cetera, puts SDDM in a really good position to support your critical initiatives while giving you visibility. So with that being said, we did have 2 questions. Oh, I'm sorry. So let me talk about the special offer today. So we have available on our website, we have our FireScope SDDM Community Edition. It's a free trial that you can download. Normally, we limit it to 50 CIs, but for webinar attendees, we are bumping that up to 100 CIs. Plus, we are also offering a 1-hour consultation with one of our FireScope engineers. So this is not only to be able to stand up SDDM inside of your environment and answer your questions, but if you already have selected a CMDB solution, they can walk you through the process of how SDDM can help with your CMDB efforts as far as implementation goes. So with that being said, like I said, we actually had 2 questions come in, so I will ask those really quick. The first question is, how big of an effort is it to deploy the FireScope solution in the environment, be able to scan it and load the data into a CMDB? Paul, I'm gonna throw that question to you.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. Yeah, so we give you a device known as our Edge device, which is a virtual appliance that you install. You need to point network traffic at it so that we can consume that network traffic, and we need to configure the scans to then go and get the supplementary data. From there, we can build the services, and the services take a matter of a couple of hours to build. But then you need to actually manually go through and check that they are what you want them to be, because you don't always want everything we find. Do you want to see clients in your service? Do you want to see the backup server in your service? So those are business decisions. Once you're happy with that, we just need to configure the integration to your CMDB, which is usually just a username, password, and an API type key and a URL. Define the CI type matching, the CI field matching, and then we're good to go. We can then start synchronizing. The whole process, once everything's up and running, just once it's configured, the whole configuration could take sort of a couple of 3 days.
Great, thank you for that, Paul. And then the next question is, what type of administrative rights do you need to have to deploy our solution in an environment and scan the environment? Devin, I'll give that question to you.
Yes, that doesn't require any administrative rights or anything like that. It's simply normally just read-only credentials are really all that's needed from a network devices SNMP perspective, and then for VMware discoveries, things like that, just read-only credentials as well.